The morning sun rose slowly over the valley of New Haven, painting the purple-leafed forests in shades of gold and amber. Lisa Grant stood on the balcony of her small office building, holding a cup of coffee and watching the colony wake up below her. She had been the defense commander of this settlement for 5 years now, and she still felt grateful every single day for the peace they enjoyed here. New Haven was not a large colony by human standards. About 8,000 people called it home, spread across a valley that stretched for nearly 30 miles. They had farms growing earth crops that had adapted surprisingly well to the alien soil. They had factories that processed the minerals from the nearby mountains. They had schools where nearly 2,000 children learned and played and dreamed about there. Future's Lisa's second in command. A former Marine named Danny Ortiz walked up beside her and leaned against the railing. He was a big man with a gentle smile, and he had become her closest friend during their years of service together. Another quiet morning, he said, taking a sip from his own coffee. You know, when they assigned me to colony defense, I thought there would be more actual defending involved. Lisa laughed softly. What? You miss getting shot at? Sometimes I miss having a purpose beyond chasing those little creatures out of the grain storage, Danny admitted. Not that I am complaining. Peace is good. Peace is very good. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the streets below fill with people heading to work. In the distance, Lisa could see the yellow buses that carried children to the colony's 3 schools. Elementary School 7 was the newest, built just 2 years ago on the eastern edge of the settlement. It served the families who lived near the mining operations, and Lisa had attended its opening ceremony. She remembered the principal, a kind man named Howard Kim, giving a speech about how the school represented hope for their future on this world. The colony had existed in peace for 12 years. First contact with the Vecturi Dominion had happened about a decade ago, when human exploration ships encountered Vecturi patrol vessels near the edge of known space. The meetings had been tense at first. The Vecturi were strange beings, standing 7 feet tall with hard shells covering their bodies like insects on Earth. Their faces had no expressions that humans could read, and their voices came out in clicks and hisses that required translation devices to understand. But war had been avoided. A trade agreement was signed. The Vecturi seemed content to ignore humanity as long as humans stayed out of their way. They were an old species, proud of their history and their power. They controlled dozens of star systems and viewed themselves as the natural rulers of this part of the galaxy. Younger species like humanity were tolerated, nothing more. Lisa had never met a Vecturi in person. She had seen images and videos, read reports about their culture and their military capabilities. She knew they were dangerous, but they were also far away, and New Haven had never given them any reason to pay attention to a small farming and mining colony on the edge of human space. The morning passed like any other. Lisa reviewed supply reports and approved maintenance schedules. Danny led a training exercise for their small security team, more to keep them sharp than out of any real concern. At noon, Lisa walked down to the market square and bought lunch from a vendor who had been selling sandwiches there since the colony's founding. She sat on a bench and watched people go about their lives, feeling a deep sense of contentment. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, everything changed. The first sign was a shadow passing over the sun. Lisa looked up and felt her heart stop. 3 ships were descending through the atmosphere, their hulls gleaming with that distinctive oil-slick shimmer that marked Vecturi construction. They were warships. She recognized the weapon arrays mounted on their undersides, the heavy armor plating, the predatory shape designed for one purpose only. She was running before she even realized it, shouting into her communication device for Danny to sound the alert. But the ships were not heading for the defense compound. They were not heading for the power station or the administrative center. They flew past all of these targets without slowing down. They were heading east, toward the mining settlement, toward Elementary School 7. Lisa commandeered a vehicle and drove as fast as the engine would allow. She heard the explosions before she saw them, felt the ground shake beneath her wheels. Smoke rose into the sky ahead, thick and black against the purple leaves of the forest. The attack lasted for minutes. By the time Lisa arrived, The Vectory ships were already rising back into the sky. They did not fire at her vehicle. They did not fire at the adults running toward the destruction. They had already accomplished what they came to do. The school was gone. Where a building had stood that morning, there was now only rubble and fire. Lisa stumbled out of her vehicle and ran toward the wreckage, screaming for survivors. Other colonists arrived behind her. Parents whose children had been inside that building. Teachers who had stepped out for just a moment and returned to find their world destroyed. Danny reached her side and grabbed her arm. His face was pale, his eyes wide with horror. "Lisa," he said, his voice breaking. "Lisa, the casualty count. ... 117 children died in those 4 minutes. Another 63 were wounded, pulled from the rubble with burns and broken bones and injuries that would mark them for life. Teacher aide Megan Porter was found unconscious, her body covering 5 small children she had protected with her own flesh. She survived, but burns covered half her body. Principal Howard Kim was found near a side door, his arms still reaching toward the children he had been trying to guide to safety in the chaos that followed. Someone found the Vectory transmission. It had been broadcast to the colony's communication systems as the ships departed, a single message in broken human language. This lesson for expansion. Know your place. Lisa stood in the ruins as night fell, her uniform covered in ash and blood that was not her own. Around her, parents wept over small bodies. Rescue workers dug through rubble with bare hands, hoping against hope to find more survivors. The purple leaves of the nearby forest had caught fire, and the flames painted the sky in colors that seemed like mockery. She bent down and picked up a small backpack from the debris. It was pink, decorated with cartoon stars that sparkled even through the layer of dust covering them. A name tag was attached to the strap. Sophie. The name was written in careful handwriting, the letters slightly crooked in the way that showed a child had written them. Herself. Lisa held the backpack against her chest and felt something inside her change forever. The peace she had cherished that morning was gone. The contentment she had felt on that bench in the market square belonged to a different person, someone who no longer existed. She pulled out her communication device and opened a channel to Earth. Her hand was shaking, but her voice was steady. "This is Commander Lisa Grant of New Haven Colony. I need to speak with United Earth Command immediately. We have been attacked. Our children are dead, and humanity needs to know what happened here today." The message began its 12th-day journey across the stars, carrying with it images and reports and the names of 117 children who would never grow up. The galaxy was about to learn something important about humanity, something that would change the balance of power forever. No. One hurts human children and escapes the consequences. No one. The transmission from New Haven arrived at United Earth Command headquarters on a Tuesday morning. The building sat in the heart of Geneva, a massive structure of glass and steel that housed the military leadership of all human colonies. Thousands of people worked there every day, managing the defense of a civilization that had spread across 200 worlds. Admiral Chavance was in her office reviewing fleet assignments when her aide knocked on the door. The young officer's face was troubled, and his hands were shaking as he held out a data tablet. "Admiral," he said quietly, "you need to see this." It came from New Haven Colony. Priority 1 transmission. Patricia took the tablet and began reading. The color drained from her face within the first paragraph. By the time she reached the casualty list, her hands were gripping the device so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She looked up at her aide, and he saw something in her eyes he had never seen before in all his years of service. "Get me the council," she said. "Every member. Emergency session. Now." By nightfall, every leader in the United Earth government had seen the footage from New Haven. They watched the Vectory ships descend through the atmosphere. They watched the explosions tear through elementary school. 7. They watched parents screaming and rescue workers digging through rubble and small bodies being carried out one by one. President Marcus Bell sat at the head of the council table, his face gray with shock and grief. He was a father of 3, and his youngest daughter was the same age as many of the children who had died. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked on the first few words before steadying. "They murdered children," he said simply. They murdered our children to teach us a lesson about expansion. They killed 117 kids who had never done anything to anyone, who had never even seen a Vectary, who were just trying to learn and grow and live their lives. The council chamber was silent. Some members were crying openly. Others sat with clenched fists and burning eyes. Admiral Vance stood against the wall, her uniform perfectly pressed, her expression carved from stone. The Vectary ambassador has requested a meeting, the foreign minister reported. He says he has a message from the Dominion leadership explaining their actions. Let him come, President Bell said. Let him explain. The ambassador arrived the next morning, escorted by a heavy security detail. He was tall, even by Vectary standards, his shell darker than most of his species, decorated with markings that indicated high rank. He walked into the council chamber with what humans would later recognize as amusement, his movements casual and unhurried. Through his translator device, he addressed the assembled human leaders. The Dominion acknowledges the recent correction administered to your colony on Verdant Prime, he said. Your species has been expanding too quickly, claiming worlds that should remain unclaimed, pushing into regions that are not meant for lesser races. This was a reminder of the natural order of things. President Bell's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. A reminder? You bombed a school full of children. You're young or replaceable, the ambassador replied, his translator rendering his clicks and hisses into flat, emotionless words. You breed quickly, as all lesser species do. The loss of a few hundred offspring is nothing compared to the message we needed to send. You should thank us for being so merciful. We could have destroyed the entire colony. The silence that followed was dangerous. Admiral Vance took a step forward, and it took 4 Marines to hold her back. Her eyes never left the ambassador's face, and the hatred in them was pure and cold and absolute. Security Chief Ryan Cole later testified that preventing the admiral from attacking the ambassador was the hardest thing he had ever done. She was not a small woman, and in that moment, she had the strength of every grieving parent on New Haven flowing through her. Get out, President Bell said, his voice barely above a whisper. Get out of this building. Get out of this city. Get off this planet. You have 1 hour. Ambassador tilted his head, a gesture that might have indicated confusion. You reject our explanation? This is unwise. The Dominion does not appreciate 1 hour, the president repeated. If you are still on Earth after that, I will not be responsible for what happens to you. The ambassador left. His shuttle lifted off exactly 53 minutes later, rising into the sky above Geneva while crowds gathered below to watch. Some threw things at the departing ship. Others simply stood in silence, their faces hard with fury. That evening, President Bell addressed every human settlement in the galaxy. The broadcast reached every colony, every station, every ship traveling between the stars. Billions of people stopped what they were doing to watch their leaders speak. Citizens of humanity, he began, I speak to you tonight with a broken heart. 12 days ago, the Vectary Dominion attacked a school on New Haven Colony. 117 children are dead. 63 more are wounded. Teachers and staff gave their lives trying to protect their students. He paused, gathering himself. The Vectary ambassador visited us today. He told us this attack was a lesson. He told us our children are replaceable. He told us we should be grateful they did not kill more. The president's voice hardened. To the Vectary Dominion, I say this. You believe you have taught humanity a lesson today. You have, but the lesson is not what you intended. He leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. You have taught us that you are monsters. You have taught us that negotiation and diplomacy mean nothing to you. You have taught us that our children are not safe, while you exist as a military power. You have taught us that mercy and restraint are things you do not understand. His next words would echo through history. Now we will teach you something in return. We will teach you what happens when you hurt our kids. We will teach you that humanity protects its young with a fury you cannot imagine. We will teach you that there is no corner of this galaxy far enough to hide from our response. He stood up from his chair, his figure filling the screen. To every human hearing this message, we are going to war, not for territory, Not for resources. Not for pride. We are going to war because they killed our children and laughed about it. We are going to war because this can never be allowed to happen again. We are going to war because that is what parents do when someone hurts their kids. The broadcast ended. Across human space, people began to respond. Volunteers flooded military recruitment centers. Factories switched to war production without waiting for official orders. Scientists abandoned civilian projects to work on weapon systems. A civilization that had been content with peaceful expansion suddenly remembered that it knew how to fight. On New Haven, Lisa Grant watched the president's speech on a small screen in the ruins of Elementary School 7. The fires were out now, but the smell of smoke still hung in the air. Behind her, workers continued to search the rubble for any remains that might have been missed. Danny Ortiz stood beside her, his arm in a sling from injuries he had gotten during the rescue efforts. "Do you think we can actually beat them?" he asked quietly. The Vectheri had been fighting wars for thousands of years. Lisa looked at the pink backpack she still carried, the one with Sophie's name on the tag. She had not let it out of her sight since finding it. "I do not know if we can beat them," she admitted. "But I know we are going to try. And I know that every single human being in this galaxy is going to fight like they have nothing left to lose. Because for many of us, that is exactly true." Above them, the stars were coming out. Somewhere among them, the Vectheri Dominion waited. Confident in their power and their superiority, they had no idea what was coming. For 6 months after the attack on New Haven, the galaxy watched humanity and saw nothing unusual. The Vectheri Dominion monitored human space with their long-range sensors and spy ships, expecting to see military buildups and fleet movements. Instead, they saw only grief and rebuilding. They saw memorial services and funerals. They saw a species that appeared to be mourning its dead while accepting its place in the galactic order. The Dominion leadership congratulated themselves on the success of their lesson. Other alien species in the region took note of how easily the humans had been controlled. The consensus among the older civilizations was clear. Humanity was young, emotional, and ultimately weak. They had made noise about war, but noise was all it would ever be. They were completely wrong. Admiral Trisha Vance stood in a secret facility buried deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, watching through reinforced windows as the first of the new warships completed its final assembly. The vessel was enormous, 3 times larger than anything humanity had built before. Its hull was covered in weapons systems that had existed only as theories 6 months ago. Its engines could carry it across the galaxy in weeks rather than months. "How many do we have ready?" she asked the officer standing beside her. Commander Jake Sullivan checked his tablet. He was a young man, barely 30, but his eyes held a hardness that made him seem much older. His fiancée had been a teacher at Elementary School 7. She had died trying to shield her students from the initial blast. 32 battleships, 96 destroyers, 200 support vessels, and more coming online every day. Patricia nodded slowly. "And the crews? Fully trained and ready? We have had no shortage of volunteers. People are fighting for positions on these ships. Across 200 colony worlds, the same scene was playing out in different forms. Shipyards that had spent years building cargo vessels were now producing weapons of war. Mining operations that had supplied commercial ventures were redirecting every ounce of metal to military production. Research facilities that had focused on agricultural improvements and medical advances were working day and night on weapons systems. The transformation had been invisible to outside observers because humanity had planned it that way. Everything happened underground, in secret locations, behind security screens that blocked all sensor scans. The Vectheri saw the surface activity and assumed it told the whole story. They never looked deeper. Elena Cruz, naval captain who would later become Patricia's flag officer on the lead carrier, supervised training exercises in a hidden base on the far side of Earth's moon. Her nephew had been among the children killed at New Haven. She had received the news while commanding a patrol ship near the outer colonies. Her crew reported that she had read the message 3 times, then locked herself in her quarters for exactly 1 hour. When she emerged, her face was calm and her voice was steady. I will not let emotion cloud my judgment, she told her officers during a briefing. But I will never forget why we are doing this. Every drill, every simulation, every hour of preparation is for those children. We will be ready when the time comes. At research stations scattered across human space, scientists worked on weapons that would have seemed like fantasy just months earlier. Energy shields that could absorb Vectory weapons fire, missiles that could track targets across thousands of miles with perfect accuracy, fighter craft that could outrun anything in the Dominion fleet. Dr. Amy Chen led a team of physicists who had been studying theoretical propulsion systems before the attack. Now they were building engines that would let human ships appear seemingly out of nowhere, striking before the enemy could react and disappearing before they could respond. The Vectory have been perfecting their technology for millennia, Amy told her team during a late-night session. They think that makes them superior. But they have also become comfortable with their advantages. They do not innovate anymore because they do not believe they need to. We are going to show them how wrong they are. The 6th month arrived, and Admiral Vance called a meeting of her senior commanders. They gathered in a secure briefing room deep underground, surrounded by screens showing the status of every ship, every weapon, every soldier in the growing fleet. In 2 weeks, Patricia announced, we launched the Retribution fleet. Our target is the Vectory Dominion itself. We will destroy their military capabilities so completely that they will never again pose a threat to human children. Or any children, Elena Cruz spoke up. What are our rules of engagement regarding civilian targets? Patricia's expression was firm. We are not them. We do not murder innocents. We do not bomb schools. We do not kill children to send messages. Military targets only. Warships, bases, weapons factories, shipyards. We destroy their ability to wage war and nothing more. Jake Sullivan raised a hand. What if they use civilians as shields? The Vectory might try to hide their military assets in populated areas once they realize what is happening. Then we find another way, Patricia replied. I will not become the thing I am fighting against. If we have to take longer to win this war because we refuse to harm innocents, then that is what we will do. Our children did not die so that we could become monsters in their name. The commanders nodded their agreement. They understood. Every one of them had lost someone in the attack, or knew someone who had, or had seen the footage that still played in their nightmares. They wanted revenge. They wanted justice, but they also wanted to remain human. The final preparations took 2 more weeks. Ships were loaded with supplies. Crews said goodbye to their families. Chaplains and counselors moved through the fleet, offering support to anyone who needed it. On the morning of launch day, the Retribution fleet assembled at a staging point on the edge of human space. 14 carriers, 32 battleships, 96 destroyers, and 200 support ships formed a formation that stretched across thousands of miles of space. At their head was the carrier Righteous Fury. Admiral Vance's flagship. Elena Cruz ordered a final inspection of the ship's hull before departure. When the crew finished, they reported that the painters had added something. A message had been written on the Righteous Fury in letters large enough to be seen from orbit, in both human languages and Vectory script, for the children of New Haven. Patricia stood on the bridge, looking out at her fleet through the main view screen. Behind her, Jake Sullivan monitored tactical displays. Elena sat in the captain's chair, her hands steady on the controls. Open a channel to all ships, Patricia ordered. Channel open, Admiral. She took a breath. This is Admiral Vance to all personnel. 8 months ago, the Vectory Dominion murdered 117 human children. They did this to teach us a lesson about knowing our place. Today, we begin our response. She paused, letting her words sink in. We are not going to war for glory or conquest. We are not seeking territory or resources. We are going to war because someone hurt our children and told us to accept it. We are going to war because the galaxy needs to learn that humanity protects its young. We are going to war because it is the right thing to do. Her voice hardened. Every one of you knows someone who was affected by the attack on New Haven. Every one of you carries that grief and that anger. I am asking you to channel those feelings into focus, into discipline, into the determination to complete our mission. We will destroy the Dominion's ability to ever do this again. And we will do it while remaining true to who we are. She looked at Elena and nodded. All ships, engage engines. Set course for Vectory space. The lesson begins now. The Retribution fleet moved forward as one, leaving human space behind. Ahead of them, the Vectory Dominion waited, still confident in their power, still believing that younger species could be controlled through violence and fear. They were about to learn the truth about humanity. Some lessons cannot be taught. They can only be experienced. The Vectory border stations detected the human fleet 3 days before it reached their space. The officers on duty initially believed their sensors were malfunctioning. The readings showed more ships than humanity was supposed to possess. Larger ships than humanity was supposed to be capable of building. Weapons systems that humanity was not supposed to have developed yet. By the time they confirmed the readings were accurate, panic had begun to spread through the Dominion military command. How is this possible? Demanded Fleet Commander Crix, the highest-ranking Vectory officer in the border region. His subordinates had no answer. The humans had been monitored constantly since the attack on their colony. Nothing unusual had been detected. Yet here was a fleet that seemed to have appeared from nowhere, bearing down on them with obvious hostile intent. The Dominion assembled a defensive force of 40 warships, pulling vessels from patrol routes and stationed guards across 3 star systems. It was the largest concentration of Vectory military power in decades. Commander Crix was confident that their superior technology would compensate for being outnumbered. The Vectory had been fighting wars for thousands of years. Humanity had barely left their home planet. He was about to learn how much could change in 8 months of focused, furious preparation. The Battle of the Vectory border began at dawn by Earth Standard Time. Admiral Patricia Vance ordered her fleet into attack formation, the carriers hanging back while battleships and destroyers pressed forward in a wedge. The Vectory responded with their traditional defensive pattern, a sphere of overlapping fire zones that had crushed countless enemies over the millennia. Lieutenant Commander Rosa Martinez led the first fighter wing into battle. She was 34 years old, a veteran pilot who had spent 15 years flying patrol missions and escort duties. She had never seen real combat. Neither had most of her pilots. But they had trained for this moment every day since the fleet launched, and they were ready. All wings. This is Martinez. Remember your training. Remember why we are here. And remember that those children are counting on us. Her fighters dove into the heart of the enemy formation, weaving between Vectory warships with a speed and agility that stunned the alien commanders. The new engines the scientists had developed worked even better than expected. Human craft appeared in one location, fired their weapons, and vanished before the Vectory could target them. The defensive sphere began to collapse. Vectory ships tried to track the human fighters and left themselves exposed to the battleships approaching from the front. Admiral Vance watched the tactical display on the bridge of the Righteous Fury, calling out targets and coordinating the attack with the precision of a surgeon. Battleship Group Alpha, concentrate fire on their flagship. Destroyer Squadron 7, cover Martinez's wing as they pull back. Carrier Group 2, launch your reserve fighters now. Lena Cruz relayed the orders, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. Jake Sullivan monitored the enemy movements, predicting their responses and adjusting the human formation to counter them. The battle lasted 19 hours. 19 hours of continuous fighting, of ships exploding and lives ending in the cold darkness of space. Rosa Martinez lost 11 pilots under her command. Young men and women who had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not survive. She refused to withdraw until her objectives were complete. Leading attack, run after attack. Run until her fighter was so damaged it could barely fly. Her final transmission before ejecting from her crippled craft became famous across human space. Tell my daughter I did this for her. Tell all our daughters. Tell them we did not let those children die for nothing. She was rescued by a support ship 3 hours later, bruised and bleeding but alive. Her daughter, a 7-year-old girl named Carmen, who had spent the past 8 months terrified that her mother would not come home. watched the news feeds with her grandmother, and cried with relief when the battle ended. The Vecthory defensive fleet was destroyed. Not a single enemy ship escaped. Not a single human capital ship was lost, though many sustained heavy damage that would require weeks to repair. Commander Crix died when his flagship exploded. It's never understanding how the humans had become so powerful so quickly. Admiral Vance did not pause to celebrate. There would be time for that later, when the mission was complete. She ordered the fleet to continue forward, deeper into Vecthory space. Over the following 3 weeks, humanity systematically dismantled the Vecthory war machine. Every military installation they encountered was destroyed. Weapons factories were bombed until nothing remained but twisted metal and smoking craters. Shipyards where warships were built were reduced to floating debris. Defense platforms that had protected Vecthory systems for centuries were torn apart. Throughout the campaign, Trisha maintained strict discipline regarding civilian targets. When intelligence reports indicated that a weapons factory was located near a residential area, she ordered her commanders to find another approach. Use precision strikes only, she instructed. I want that factory destroyed and nothing else touched. If we cannot do it cleanly, we find another target. Her officers sometimes grumbled about the restrictions. The Vecthory had shown no such consideration for human civilians, but Patricia held firm. We are not them, she repeated whenever someone questioned the policy. The moment we start killing their children to avenge ours, we become exactly what we are fighting against. Our children would not want that. I will not allow it. On the 26th day of the campaign, the Retribution fleet entered orbit around the Vecthory homeworld. It was a large planet, covered in sprawling cities and industrial complexes. Billions of Vecthory looked up at the human ships darkening their sky and felt something their species had not experienced in living memory. Fear. True. Paralyzing fear? Admiral Vance broadcast a message that was heard by every Vecthory on the planet, translated into their language and played through every communication system. You killed our children because you thought us weak. Killed our children because you believed we would do nothing. You watched them die, and you laughed, and you told us to be grateful you did not kill more. Let the silence stretch for a long moment. Look at your sky now. Look at the ships above you. Your military is gone. Your fleet is destroyed. Your empire lies in ruins around you. We could glass your world right now, today, and there is nothing you could do to stop us. Your children would die screaming, just as ours did. Your cities would burn, just as our school burned. Your species would be reduced to scattered survivors, begging for mercy from a galaxy that would give them none. The Vecthory leadership waited in their bunkers, preparing for the bombardment they believed was inevitable. They had already begun recording final messages to whatever survivors might remain, but the bombardment did not come. We will not do this, Patricia continued, because we are not you. Because our children would not want us to become monsters in their name. Because proving that we are better than you matters more than revenge. Her voice softened slightly. Instead, you will live. You will live with the knowledge of what you did and what we could have done in return. You will live knowing that we showed you mercy you did not deserve. You will live as a lesson to every other species in this galaxy about what happens when you hurt human children. She paused one final time. Remember this moment. Remember how it felt to look up at our ships and know that your lives were in our hands. Remember that we chose to spare you when you would not have spared us. And remember that if you ever threaten our children again, we will come back. And next time, we will not be merciful. The transmission ended. The Vecthory leadership emerged. From their bunkers hours later, confused and disoriented by an outcome they had never imagined. They had expected death. They had received something far worse. They had received mercy from a species. They had tried to terrorize, and they would have to live with that shame forever. The treaty negotiations lasted exactly 4 hours. They were not negotiations in any real sense. The Vecthory had no leverage, no military to threaten with, no allies willing to intervene on their behalf. They accepted every term humanity offered because the alternative was the destruction they had narrowly avoided. The Dominion was dissolved. The empire that had ruled dozens of star systems for millennia simply ceased to exist as a political entity. Vecthory military forces were permanently disbanded, their remaining ships dismantled, their weapons factories converted to civilian production. A human observation station was established in permanent orbit around their homeworld, a constant reminder of their defeat and their shame. Reparations were calculated and paid. The families of New Haven received compensation that would ensure they never wanted for anything material again. But no amount of credits could replace what was lost. No amount of money could bring back 117 children who should have grown up to live full lives. Admiral Patricia Vance returned to Earth a hero. Crowds lined the streets of Geneva to welcome her home, cheering and waving flags and holding signs that thanked her for avenging their children. She accepted the praise gracefully but found herself uncomfortable with the celebrations. "I did what needed to be done," she told reporters. "Any commander would have done the same. The real heroes are the soldiers who fought and died, and the families who lost their children and somehow found the strength to keep going." Rosa Martinez was promoted to full commander and given her choice of assignments. She chose to lead a training program for new pilots, passing on the skills she had learned during the battle. Her daughter Carmen, now 8 years old, attended her promotion ceremony and watched with shining eyes as medals were pinned to her mother's uniform. "Are you a hero, Mom?" Carmen asked afterward. Rosa knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. "I am just someone who loved her little girl so much that she was willing to fight for her, just like all those parents love their children on New Haven." That is not heroism. That is just being a parent. On the first anniversary of the attack, a memorial was dedicated at the site of Elementary School 7. The rubble had been cleared away, and in its place stood a garden filled with flowers from Earth and from verdant prime. At the center of the garden, a white marble wall bore the names of every child and teacher killed on that terrible day. Lisa Grant, now Governor Grant of New Haven, gave the dedication speech. Beside her stood Megan Porter, the teacher's aide who had protected 5 children with her own body. The scars on her face and arms were still visible, but her eyes were clear and her voice was strong. "We built this memorial not to celebrate war," Lisa said, her voice carrying across the crowd of thousands who had gathered. "We built it so that we will never forget why peace matters. Every name on this wall represents a life cut short by cruelty and arrogance. Every name represents a future that will never be. Every name represents a child who should be here today, growing up and learning and playing with their friends." She paused, looking out at the families who had lost so much. "The Vectory wanted to teach us our place. It wanted us to accept that we were lesser beings, that our children's lives meant nothing, that we should be grateful for whatever scraps of existence they allowed us to have." Her voice hardened. "Instead, they taught us something far more important. They taught us that humanity will never accept the murder of its children. They taught us that we are capable of things we never imagined when we have something worth fighting for. They taught us that the galaxy is safer when everyone understands the price of hurting our young." She looked up at the sky, where the stars were beginning to appear in the fading light. "The galaxy knows now that humanity protects its children. They know that there is no distance too far, no enemy too strong, no price too high when our young are threatened. This is not a boast or a warning. It is simply what we are. It is what parents have always been, since the beginning of our species. We protect our children. That is the most basic truth of human existence." The memorial ceremony ended with the release of thousands of paper lanterns, one for each child who had died. They rose into the darkening sky like stars being born, carrying the memories of the lost toward the heavens. 10 years passed. The Vectory worked to rebuild their civilization within the strict limits imposed by the treaty. They developed new industries, new arts, new ways of thinking about their place in the galaxy. Slowly, painfully, they began to change. On the 10th anniversary of the attack, a Vectory diplomatic envoy arrived on Earth. They came seeking to establish new relations with humanity, hoping that enough time had passed for healing to begin. The ambassador was young by Vectory standards. Born after the war, carrying none of the arrogance that had characterized his predecessors, Ambassador Linda Hayes received them in Geneva. She was 32 years old, a rising star in human diplomacy, known for her intelligence and her fairness. E had been 12 years old when the attack happened. Fewer still knew that her best friend Sophie had been among the children killed at Elementary School 7. The young ambassador spoke carefully. choosing his words with obvious thought. We understand that what the Dominion did can never be undone. We understand that the pain we caused will echo through generations. But we ask, is forgiveness possible? Can our species ever truly make peace? Linda considered the question for a long moment. She thought about Sophie, about the pink backpack with cartoon stars, about the careful handwriting on the name tag. She thought about the parents she had seen at the memorial service, older now, but still carrying their grief. She thought about her own journey from a frightened child to the woman she had become. Forgiveness may come someday, she said finally. It is not mine to give or withhold on behalf of everyone who suffered. But I can tell you this, humanity does not want eternal war. We do not want to hate forever. We want to live in peace, to explore the stars, to build a future where our children are safe. She met the ambassador's eyes directly. But we will never forget. Never. What happened on New Haven is part of us now, woven into our history and our identity. We will teach our children about it, and they will teach theirs. Not to keep the hatred alive, but to remember why we must always be vigilant, why we must never again allow ourselves to be seen as weak or afraid. The ambassador bowed his head in acceptance. We understand. And we will remember too. Our children are taught what their ancestors did. They are taught the shame of it. Perhaps in time that shared memory will be the foundation for something better. Throughout the galaxy, other species watched the meeting and drew their own conclusions. A new saying had spread among the stars over the past decade, repeated whenever a younger race asked about humanity. Never harm their children. They forgave the Vectri eventually, but it took them a century, and it cost the Dominion everything. Some lessons once learned are never forgotten. Humanity continued to expand among the stars. They built colonies on 100 new worlds and established trade routes that connected civilizations across vast distances. They made allies and formed friendships with dozens of species. They explored the unknown reaches of the galaxy, always pushing forward, always seeking something new, and everywhere they went, they carried with them the memory of 117 children, who died on a spring morning in a valley of purple-leafed forests. Those names remained carved in white marble on New Haven, visited by millions of pilgrims every year. Those names were taught in schools across human space, spoken aloud on the anniversary of the attack, honored by generations who had never known the children they represented. The lesson of New Haven was learned by all who encountered humanity. It was not a lesson of violence or vengeance. It was simpler and deeper than that. Some species are more protective of their young than others. Some species will burn down the galaxy to keep their children safe. Some species will forgive anything except the murder of innocents. Humans are the most protective of all, and the galaxy would never forget it. On New Haven, the memorial garden bloomed every spring with flowers from two worlds. Children played in the shadow of the white marble wall, their laughter echoing across the valley where so much had been lost and so much had been gained. Their parents watched them with careful eyes, grateful for every moment of peace above them. The stars shone down like the paper lanterns that rose every year on the anniversary of the attack. And somewhere among those stars, the children of New Haven rested at last, their names remembered, their sacrifice honored, their futures lived by the generations who came after. The story was not over. Stories like this never really end. But the worst chapter was finished, and something better had taken its place. That was enough. It had to be enough. And somewhere, somehow, the children were at peace.